Welcome again to Open Range Real Estate segment with Will Gardner. I am your host here, and I am with Century 21 Morrison Realty, a group here based out of Bismarck, North Dakota, but we service the entire state. And every week, we're here once a week to get you more informed about real estate because it is a great valuable asset for your life and for your business, for all aspects of your life and business. This is one segment a week that you're going to learn a lot from. And so we're going to dive right into it. Today, we're going to talk about appraisals and appraisers. And there's a lot to talk about. We even have 3 segments, so you do not want to miss this because in this whole entirety, because we have a lot that you're going to be probably surprised about. And we're going to open your eyes a lot to everything that the appraisal world has in store and all the behind the scenes things that you may not know about with appraisal. So we're going to get into that. I want to start by talking a little bit about history of the appraisal. So let's talk about before 2008. So before 2008, the appraisal world was a little more relaxed and a lot less, I guess, bureaucratic red tape. And always because of that, the problems happen. So this is the frustrating thing about government, is that sometimes you let people do whatever they want, and you have an open and free society, and then people break some of the rules, and then what happens is actually probably worse, is the pendulum swings the other way, and you have all these regulations. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So 2008, what happened was when the real estate bubble, the mortgage bubble burst. And what happened was, and there may have been other parts to it, but the part that changed as realtors for us and people buying real estate was in 2008, when what had happened previously was people would get a loan for a home, and they go into this house, and maybe the house is worth, I don't know, $800,000, $850,000, and the purchase price was maybe $900,000, $1 million, and you had people in the industry. I would assume realtors were just as guilty of this too, but realtors, perhaps lenders, everyone in the industry, they would have their appraiser, and while their appraisers could value the properties. So, of course, if you don't have the property evaluate for what it's worth, then the bank's not going to give you a loan for this. So you follow where we're at now? So if you're not going to be able to get a loan for it, you need to make sure that appraised value is up, right? So there were a lot of, I don't know exactly what was happening in the industry at that time because I wasn't practicing at that time, but there was enough going on to where regulators said, this is a problem. And so in 2008, all of these houses were appraising for way more than supposedly they were worth. And so in 2008, that's when everything blew up, and no one could pay off their loans that were coming due, or they couldn't pay the mortgage, and they found out they couldn't resell them, and so all of the valuations that were supposedly true were supposedly not true anymore. Now, I have some other reasons to believe why that may not have been the case, but Congress, in its infinite wisdom, said, well, we're going to pass this Dodd-Frank Act, and we're going to change it. So now you can't just have your favorite appraiser and the one who does good evaluations and gets those values high. You can't do that anymore. You can't just have your golfing buddy evaluate homes. We're going to have a real system, we're going to have a system in place where we're going to pick and not be able to pick and choose. You're going to have to put it in a random order in order for you to pick an appraiser. So all this regulation has made things more difficult on our end today, and things are not as, not as smooth and maybe as reasonable as you might think, because there's all this red tape. So that's what happened. So let's talk about what that means today. So since now that we have this requirement where you have to get a panel, a bank will have a panel of appraisers that they will pull from, they'll have to do that randomly. So they send it out to bids to a random group of appraisers, and then sometimes quasi-random because these banks get to pick who's on their panel. So they can't maybe pick their favorite person, the one who's going to do high valuations. They have to put several in their panel, and then that's who they can choose, who they can choose from, who they can send bids out to, and they get the appraisal back. So that's all happening behind the scenes, right? So because of that, one of the things that has been kind of a problem is communication. One of the other things that Dodd-Frank set out was they said that now we don't want you communicating. We don't want you to say, hey, Bob, I think it's worth this, or hey, Joe, I think it's worth that. They have to actually not have any communication, or it has to go through a third party between the lender and the appraiser. Now, ironically, realtors themselves can communicate to some degree in some manner. We'll have appraisers reach out to us as realtors, get feedback from what we know about the house in order to help them with the valuation. So thankfully, there's not such a stringent restriction between realtors and appraisers. Also interesting too, because as realtors, we are motivated by a commission too. But that's what the rules are. And so the communication thing is kind of interesting. I'll talk to a lender and say, hey, who's the lender or who's the appraiser? And sometimes they don't even know the name of the lender, name of the appraiser, and sometimes they do know the appraiser. So that's kind of an interesting twist to this. And sometimes the bank will call and say, hey, has the appraiser reached out to you to do the appraisal? Have they been in the house? So a lot of times lenders are in the dark, and they rely on us as realtors to tell them what's going on, who the appraiser is. They might be like, who is the appraiser? Who picked this up? The other thing that happens is because you're dealing with this panel and you have to choose from certain appraisers, is almost kind of like not a check and balance. There probably is, but from a realtor's perspective, it feels like there's no checks and balances when we get a bad appraiser. Now, what does it mean to be a bad appraiser? I mean, some people will say, well, you'd want that valuation to be high, and so you'll call somebody a bad appraiser if they don't appraise it for a certain value. Well, in some cases that actually might be true, that they're not valuing it high enough, but there's a lot of aspects of picking a good appraiser that's going to be important. So for example, how quickly they can get to a house, how quickly they can respond, how much detail they take, what kind of comps are they taking into consideration, and what they're not learning about the house or the questions they're not asking in order for them to make a good valuation of a property. So those are a few of the frustrating challenges. The other thing is the lack of appraisers. So, and this is not necessarily Dodd-Frank, this has kind of always been a problem, that in order for you to become an appraiser, you have to study and work underneath a master appraiser. I'm probably getting the term wrong, but of someone who is in charge, has done enough, just like you would have a master electrician or a broker. They have the same kind of setup. And so if you only have a certain number of appraisers in town, you may not be able to get to work because they may not be accepting new people. And so there's a little bit of problem there. So both lack of appraisers, communication with appraisers, and what you do when you have an appraiser who's not really being reasonable in their evaluations. One other thing too is, it seems to me that a lot of appraisers, they tend to, and I would too if I were in their shoes, they tend to want to make sure that their valuations stand up. In other words, they're probably not going to get in trouble if they undervalue it, but if they overvalue it, then they're the ones who's next are on the line for saying, well, you said it was worth that much. So one gripe I have with appraisers and their system is that it requires that you're kind of motivating them to devalue the home. And in the case where there's a lot of inflation happening and prices keep going up and up and up, there's this barrier that these appraisers, they keep trying to get higher valuations, but they're afraid that if they go too high, they're going to get in trouble. They're going to come into question if their valuations are too high. So that's one interesting dynamic. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple other aspects of how appraisers work and appraisals work versus other types of valuations that are not appraisals. So you have a city assessed values. That's when the city comes out, says this is what your house is worth, right? And I'll hear complaints from my clients all the time. Hey, the city said my house is worth $300,000, but we bought it just last year for $250,000. How did that happen? So in that case, we can come in as realtors, they'll call me up and I'll actually send the city, and I'll send it to my clients and they'll send it to the city, comparable properties that have sold to show them that their home should really be valued closer to that lower mark. Sometimes cities will value it lower, sometimes they'll value it higher, very seldom right on the dot. So that's one type of valuation. Another type of valuation is what we do as realtors called comparative analysis. And so if you do a full-blown appraisal, that's going to cost you a ton of money. And as realtors, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is valuing properties, and we're really good at it. And so a lot of people, before they list, they'll want to value their home, and sometimes I'll get some of my clients or potential clients saying, Will, should I go and get an evaluation from an appraiser? And I'll say, no, don't do that. I will do that as part of my listing so that you won't have to have an extra fee paying for that. In addition, if you do in the future have to have that, if you sell that home to someone who's paying for the home with financing, you're going to have problems because, well, not going to have problems, but you're going to be paying for an appraisal twice. So you're going to pay for it up front, and then the buyer's going to have to pay for it as well. And those are expensive. So when we come back after the break, I'm going to talk to you about how you can save a lot of money by using comparative analysis versus an appraiser. Welcome back again to Open Range. Will Gardner, your host here, Century 21. We are talking about appraisals, appraisers, and all the different aspects of valuing your home. And we're going to get into how we can save you money and do that with comparative analysis. But first, let's go into one of our first properties of this episode. We are looking at a flipper home, a fixer-upper home. So this one, you're going to have to look with one eye closed because this one needs a little work, it's a little TLC, but that means opportunity here. So 1099, this is 108th 7th Avenue Northwest Mandan. So owner just, he tried to flip it. It's an older gentleman, just a little more than he could handle. He's got multiple things going on, and so this one is right for someone who wants to make a lot of money fixing it up, maybe turning it into an investment property or selling it again. So you can't buy anything at that kind of price. 1099 inside City of Mandan, great property. So if you're interested in that, yeah, just look it up. You can email the show or email myself or call. That'd be fine. But let's talk again here about appraisals. And so we were talking about comparative analysis versus an appraisal. A comparative analysis is going to save you money because most of the time, if you have a good realtor, a full-time realtor, they're going to be able to do that for you as a service. Now, and kind of part of a listing or intending to list. Now, if you have no intention to list and you just want to get your valuation, and as myself would do it for you, just be happy to do that, just to maintain good relationship, a good service. And it could save you $800 to $1,000, $1,200, depending on the residential property. If it's commercial, it's going to be a lot more. Land's going to be different, but it could save you a lot of money. And we don't do as much in-depth analysis as you would find in an appraisal. Appraisers definitely have the higher bar. They certainly are evaluating it with a fine-tooth comb on what the value is. And certainly we need appraisers and we need them in the industry. But I'll tell you that you will probably get a lot more benefit in terms of trying to push the value higher and give reasons to push it higher and to stretch that value out if you're getting a comparative analysis from a realtor. Because a realtor, they're trying to work on your behalf. They're not trying to find a neutral value for you. They're trying to find a value that will push you as far as you can, because almost all the time you want a higher valuation. Now, the city comes in and says your valuation is really high, and then we can find comps that will show you otherwise. What does this mean? Is that when you get an appraised value, when they give you that number, just remember that it's not going to be that number to every buyer. Some buyers, they may be willing to pay higher. Some buyers may be like, well, I'll give you this much for it, right? So there's definitely a range. And even sometimes I hear realtors when they're valuing a home that's maybe 400 or 500,000. Well, I always get mine within $10,000 of that range. And I'm like, well, really, if it's the perfect buyer, they might be a lot higher than your range, or they might be lower than your range. And I always tell my buyers, here's your expectations. If we price it this high, you're going to see this much traffic. You're going to sell it relatively. We can't predict the future, right? But you're going to probably sell it much quicker if you're down here, obviously, than if you're up here. And so there's a lot of strategy. It's not just about finding a number when you're listing it. It's knowing what, when you assign that number and you price it at that number, what your expectations can be. So there's a lot of, not just science, but there's a lot of art to pricing, when to price things, depending on the season you're in, depending on how you're marketing it, is all relative to how you price it. So I always tell people, appraisers are great. They're wonderful to have in the process. They're necessary. They're required to have, but don't hang on that appraised value as if it is absolutely set in stone, the only perfect number, that is the perfect number, because it's not. They're not infallible. About the closest you can get to a valuation for appraisal is like if you had a condo that's the exact same condo as every condo in that unit, and it has almost all the same updates and all the same upgrades, or brand new condo, that would probably be, you'd probably be within $5,000-$10,000 there, pretty close. So anything outside of that, real estate is so interesting, it's so different, and every property is unique, and so you have to take that as part of consideration. So there's also AI estimates. That's sometimes Zillow Z estimates. We kind of chuckle at that. They are getting much better, but still they're not all the way perfect either. They're getting better, but again, they have not walked through that house. They have not smelled the house. They have not seen the house inside and out. They don't know how it's being designed, decorated, displayed. That they have no idea. So sometimes those AI estimates can actually be hundreds of thousands of dollars off. They may not know there's water in the basement. So they may not know that they've spray foamed the ceilings of the roof. So you just really can't trust those. You really need someone walking through there. And then the last one is purchase price. Obviously, if a buyer agrees to pay for something and the sellers are willing to sell it for that, that's probably one of the best values you'll ever find, is what the purchase price is. Problem is, usually we're trying to find out what the purchase price should be, so we're working that valuation up. Usually when I have a client that I've shown several houses to in a certain price range, they'll be really honed in on what that value should be. The difference is that, let's just say it is a swimming pool, right? Well, there may be some buyer that's just like, I don't even want a swimming pool. When I buy that, I'm going to fill it in. Well, there's $30,000 in value. Even though that buyer is in that price range and see a lot of houses, he may not value that the same, and he might value it less. Some people might value it more. So difference between all those different types, really important, between city assessed value, comparative analysis, or an actual appraisal. Knowing which one is which, and how to use each one, and how to look at the numbers based on those valuations is very important. When the appraiser comes back and says this is what it's valued, that can affect the deal. The bank is not going to pay more than what the appraised value is. That's the whole purpose of doing the appraisal, is to make sure that the bank is really not being foolish with their money. So if the house is worth $300,000, but they made an offer for $320,000 or even $305,000, the lender is only going to give a loan for the $300,000. They are not going to give it for a penny more. So what does that mean? So as a buyer, that means you have to come up with that price difference. Or if you have a realtor that's representing you as a buyer, if I'm representing you, then I'm going to go to that seller's agent, say, why should my client pay a penny more? We're going to negotiate that, and we want that purchase price to be $300,000, because we should not pay any more than the value of that house. Now, obviously, it's the seller's decision whether or not he's going to accept that, or whether he still wants the $305 or the $320. But that's part of the negotiation. That's why you need a good realtor in your pocket, making sure they're protecting you from bad numbers, bad appraisals, or if they're good appraisers and good appraisals, protecting you so that you're not paying more than you should. The other thing that can happen as a result of an inspection, and I just got off the phone as I was coming in the studio today, I just got off the phone with a lender, and the lender was telling me that the buyer is going to back out of the contract. And when I talked to them, we found out that there's something wrong with the appraisal. And so I'm actually going to probably save my client a couple $1,000 because I know that there's issues with the appraisal. And so that is going to affect the deal. That's going to affect what can happen. And having a realtor who understands the contracts and knows the contracts protects you, protects your earnest money, protects your investment. Super, super important. I want to go a little bit into some other things that we help with. So I talked a little bit about how, as realtors, we can help you save some money. So I have a lot of clients that'll call me up. They get a bad appraisal or a bad assessment from the city. When I say bad, high, right? Maybe they thought their house was worth $250,000. Maybe they just bought it a couple years ago for $250,000. The city says, well, it's worth $280,000. So what we can do is I can come back and show them other properties that have sold in the last 6 months in their area. Typically, that's what we try to aim for. And I will send them, see this property, this sold for $240,000, this sold for $260,000, but I had a 2-stall garage instead of a 1-stall garage. We'll send that over, and I've had a lot of success getting the city to accept those comparative analysis, accept those comps, and change my client's taxed value and brought that down. So get a good realtor, make sure they're fighting for you. Even when you're not buying a home or selling a home, you get a relationship with someone who can help you value your home, who can help you, value it the way that you want it, because we represent you. You don't want to just hire just an appraisal if you're looking to fight for the value you want your house to be. You need someone who's got the tools, got access, and has the comps, who's seen the homes, who's like, I've been in most of those homes myself, and make sure that those comps really tell the story about how it relates to yours. So don't fall asleep on that. Make sure you're getting someone, have a great relationship with someone that's really good at doing that and has the energy to do that. We also prevent issues, and we got to go here in a break here shortly, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how we can prevent issues even before the appraiser gets there. There's things that we can do that are going to save you a lot of time, a lot of headache, and potentially a lot of money. Even after the appraiser, there's still things we can do even after the appraisal has come through and the report is back. We can still kind of save the day, put Band-Aids on, and get that appraisal to where it needs to be at the end of the day. So lots of things. There's a few other things I'm going to talk about when we come after the break. It's going to be, again, things that are going to save you money, time, headache. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back again to Open Range. Will Gardner, your host here. I'm with Century 21 Morrison Realty Broker Associate, and here on the final segment, we are talking appraisers, appraisals, and everything in between. And there's just so much in this episode here. We're going to jump back into it, talking about how realtors can help in the appraisal process. When you get that appraisal back and you need to know whether or not your property is valued the way it should be, having a realtor to give you the true north of, yes, that's accurate, no, that's not. So we're going to go into a couple things. The first thing we do is right off the bat, and again, not every realtor does this, so make sure your realtor is tuned into all of these nuances of how they can help. So one of the things that I'll do, for example, is I'll help choose a lender and avoid lenders that have bad appraisers. Appraisers that, and bad appraisers, again, that doesn't just mean their valuations are low. There's lots of aspects of the appraisal process and the appraisers that, so for example, there are some appraisers that are just slow. Their speeds and how quickly they're getting back, they're just slow. We want them to be good. We want them to be excellent appraisals, but we want them in timely fashion. Our contracts are very time sensitive. So speed is one. Being proactive. So there are some appraisers that will call ahead of time and say, Will, I noticed that you have the buyer in this. Is there any way that you can tell me more about this house, anything they fixed up in the house? Or they'll say, you know, and I notice there's some chipping paint. Maybe if you guys get that cleaned up before I come, you'll help avoid a reinspection fee. So communicating even ahead of time with that appraiser helps a lot. Just knowing who's on the panel. So appraisal panels will be at different banks in different ways. Those appraisal panels are outside the purview. I know just enough to know that certain lenders have certain appraisers on their panel, and those appraisers, some of them, I've just had bad experiences with, and so some of those, just to know who's on that, making sure they're objective, they're reasonable, they can communicate well. Another thing is having a diverse panel. So lenders who have diverse panels, so that if I have a buyer who's looking at a rural property, I want to make sure that that lender's got appraisers who are willing to do rural properties. And if they don't, am I thinking through this right, or am I setting myself up for extra costs for my clients because they have to pay a special appraiser extra money to get out there because they can't find anybody, there's nobody in their panel. So those are all part of the preempting, right? Then when to order the appraisal. There's an art to ordering the appraisal. It's not, you want to make sure you order that appraisal early enough, because if you order it really late, it could take 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. Right now we're in a time crunch where, or not a time crunch, we're in a time period where there's a lot of appraisers that are out with their appraisals 30, 45, 60 days out. There's a lot further than 30 or less. So there's more in that 45 range that I've been hearing about. So if you're ordering that halfway through after your inspections and everything are done, now you're going to be way out there. So there's ways to make that efficient, that process efficient, because no one wants delays in closing, and no one wants to stretch closing out any further than it needs to be. Time is of the essence, and for buyers and for sellers, if there's delays and if there's a long time between when you make that purchase and get your product, it's very dissatisfying, and you're antsy. It's enjoyment of life you're missing. Things in life change. Emergencies, things happen, and you got to be moving on with your life. If you're having a baby, as there's a lot of my clients have, they need to close. There's one right now, and because it was a late closing that happened, and there was nothing we could do, that affects their life. So we always want to make sure that we're getting the deals done as soon as we can, so that people still keep their interest alive. Interest rates aren't changing and fluctuating, that they're getting them locked in. So a lot of aspects there. Keep the deal moving. So I said, like preventing issues. Also, after an appraisal has been done, there are ways, if your agent is proactive, they're checking in to see what more they can do if the appraised value isn't coming where they need to help supplement those comparative properties and give those appraisals other properties to look at. Hugely beneficial for my clients. So that is different ways that we can help. I'm going to jump into some fun facts. So here's my top 10 fun facts, and then we'll show that property, one more property that we have to tell you about today. But we're going to get into some fun facts. So this one's maybe not very fun, but it is a fact. Appraisals are important and they're necessary. The appraisers are in our industry. When I say that you should get a comparative analysis if you're looking to sell your home, that's 100% still, I believe that. But when it comes to having a third-party objective person, they do have a great role in our business, and we have great relationships with most agents, and most appraisers have great relationships with each other. So you can rest assured that part is good. Number two, appraisers are not infallible or definitive, even always accurate. So even though, and I hope I don't get any hate mail from appraisers. Matter of fact, I will welcome anybody on the show. If there's an appraiser, I'll welcome you on, and maybe I'll even have one next week. But we're going to, when we mean by they're not always accurate, is that what someone's willing to pay for that property is just going to vary, right? So that your property might be worth $1 million, but someone might pay $1.2 million because it may cost them $1.4 to build it. So it's worth a lot more to the right person, and to some people it's worth a lot less. It doesn't mean that that the appraisal is wrong, and when I say accurate, I don't mean to say that it's necessarily not accurate. I mean to say that certain people are going to pay a certain price for that, and some will pay less. So next one, appraisers will reach out to realtors often for more detail and the realtor's impressions. So this one kind of amazed me when I had my first person reach out to me when I was a young realtor, like, oh wow, they want to know more information, my perspective, whether the comps, what are the comps that I had. I was like, wow, that's impressive. And it's also very smart because you want to make sure that the appraiser has every comp that they can, so that maybe they're missing one, because sometimes you do these searches for these homes when you're trying to find comparable properties, and you'll maybe miss something. You might put 2,400 square feet in your range limit, and maybe there's one at 2,405, right? And so you might miss a property. And so that's just one example of, there's lots of different ways you can miss them. So that's a great thing, is they can actually communicate. We can actually help appraisers find better comparable properties so we can get the values where they need to be. And remember, talking about how those prices and how, we always talk about getting that value up. Remember, the disparity right now between what existing homes are selling for and new construction homes, that disparity is so great. What you can pay to buy an existing home versus a new home that has no landscaping, no fence, no deck, no mature trees, no finished basement. You have all this stuff, right? Like, that's tons of value. Maybe $100,000 right there in value. That's not even calculated into the price of home. So you can think of that disparity in value just because it's a few years older. So I never have a problem when somebody's saying, well, that price should be, or the appraisers are pushing too high. I don't see it. I think we got such a gap between those existing home prices and that new construction home that there's so much room to move there. So next thing is that appraisers are given the entire contract and addendums. I love this. I couldn't believe it when I first found out. The appraisers are they're conducting their analysis, right? But they already see the purchase agreement right here, which has the price on it. It says the home is being sold for $400,000. Well, and thankfully they do see it. But I think a lot of people are kind of shocked to see that appraisers don't look at a home in a vacuum with other comps. If they have a purchase agreement, they're looking at it, they're reading it. And sometimes they can read into a lot of the detail of it and know a lot of the different terms that might change the value. So how, as a realtors, we're writing our contracts, we're writing them with the understanding that appraisers are reading this too. So that's kind of an interesting fact, is that they get to see, I always say, they see the answer in the back of the book before they start the problem. Obviously, I know that they still have to, at the end of the day, come up with their values, and they do have to come up with properties that are certainly going to be worth it and value it. But interesting fact. Appraisers are not equal. They can each interpret requirements slightly different. So this is very, very common, that there are certain appraisers that I'll go and look at a FHA, a home that is being purchased through FHA. FHA loans require much more stringent guidelines: peeling paint, smoke detectors, hand railings. There's a lot of things that FHA will flag that a regular conventional loan wouldn't flag. There are certain appraisers who look at the guidelines and say, well, this means peeling paint. This does not mean peeling paint. Some appraisers look at just have to clean up and repaint around the window. Some want the whole siding repainted. So knowing which appraisers are doing what, they're all doing their job as best they can, but there is some subjectivity to that. There are some appraisers who dig for information, and they're like private investigators, and they're trying to find any kind of information. And there's others that are taking the information that they're giving on the surface. Some appraisers will ask for comps before they're submitting their reports. That's always a great thing that we love to see, is that they're asking, hey, do you have anything else? Why did you value this property at this price? And fixing appraisal issues can be frustrating. So appraisals report and underwriters cite. That means Appraisers, they sometimes, they'll say, this is wrong. Underwriters will say, well, they said this is wrong, so you fix it. And then when you try to fix it, it gets more difficult to understand what to fix because no one wants to say, here's how you fix it. Here's how you make me happy. So plenty that we went over in this episode today. Thank you for joining us. Much more to come next week on Open Range Real Estate.